Excellent. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Emma, one of the librarians here at Rockland Public Library, and we are so thrilled to be hosting tonight's talk. Before we get started, a couple quick notes. Tonight's program will be recorded and archived to our YouTube page. So for those on Zoom, please keep your camera and microphone off while other people are speaking. Cathy has indicated that you are welcome to ask questions throughout the talk. Again, just don't interrupt her and be courteous of that. And there will also be times for questions at the end of the talk. And we'll get started in just a moment. There we go. All right. And I am happy to turn it over to tonight's speaker. Cathy Rees is a co-founder of Native Gardens of Blue Hill in Maine and has been gardening and consulting on native landscapes of coastal Maine for more than 25 years. Her book Winterland was published in 2021 by Princeton Architectural Press and features photographs by Lisa Looke. And I will turn it over to Cathy. Go right ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here tonight. I think I'll just share my screen and then we can get started. Okay, there. So, hope that's looking good. Okay, so I thought I'd just start out with a little bit about how the book came to be, and then a little bit about my thinking behind the book, and then delve into some aspects of the book that you might be interested in. So I'm going to start here. Let's see if I can get my thing to advance. Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm starting with this photo, which is not in the book. This is a photo taken by Jan Hartman, who was the seed of the whole idea behind the book. Jan is an acquisitions editor for Princeton Architectural Press, and she approached me in the fall of 2019 and with an idea about writing a book about winter gardens, and would I be interested in doing it? Well, so then came the germination period was next, where I started looking around me and thinking about the idea of the winter garden, and was kind of shocked when I added up the amount of time that our deciduous trees are without their leaves, and came up with about 7 months. So I counted a couple of times and I thought, wow, really our gardens are in winter, if we go by that definition, for more than half of the year. So why don't we appreciate them more during this season? Basically, every picture of a garden is always featuring flowers and green leaves. So I thought, you know what? I think this book is needed. Somebody needs to be thinking about the winter garden. We all need to be. So let's see, I'm having a little trouble advancing here. So, okay, so then the growth of the idea came next, where I did some research, tried to figure out what had already been written about winter gardens, and turns out there are quite a number of books out there. A lot of them have to do with the specific plants to add to your garden, specific plants, particularly ones that flower late in the fall and really early in the spring. And I thought, when we're talking 7 months of winter, that doesn't really make a dent. So I decided to focus more on the design of the garden, different aspects of the garden, and ways that we can be taking pleasure in the garden during the winter, rather than just trying to simulate summer with more flowers and more color. So the flowering of the book really came into being when I asked Lisa Looke to do the photography. I didn't know Lisa before we started the project. I had admired her photographs in the Wild Seed publications, And we did have a mutual friend who always spoke highly of Lisa. And I thought, well, this is a chance to work together. And um, so we decided to embark on this project together. So I learned a lot from Lisa during the whole process, and was just so happy to have somebody else taking the photographs and not have to be responsible for all of that. So I had found this quote that nothing is invented, it is written in nature first. And I feel like this is so true for the book, and it's also true in the garden. And I think that many of us come to this conclusion while we're working in our own gardens. Once we begin to know the plants better and start to unravel their mystery and begin to appreciate their resilience. So we attempt to make our gardens appeal to our idea of beauty by simplifying nature and by ordering it. Nature is normally pretty exuberant and diverse, but for us humans, we like things to be orderly. So the garden is a place where our idea of art and nature come together. So when that's well done, it's sometimes hard to tell the difference, like where one begins and the other ends. But one thing I think we all know as gardeners is that it is a true collaboration between us and nature. So nature is bringing her billions of years of evolutionary history to the project, and we're bringing our couple of thousand years of gardening history as well. So what does nature's creative use of winter have to offer us northerners? Well, for the people who go south every winter, probably they wouldn't see very much. However, I feel differently about it. I love the change of the seasons and the shifting cycles of dark and light, and celebrate the changes and use the lengthening darkness as an excuse just to break out the candles and do more reading. So I look forward to that transformation that takes place in the garden when the leaves fall. And suddenly you're in a garden totally unlike the one you were working in just a few months before. So for us active gardeners, we might think that we need a little bit of a break in the winter. And I'm totally on board with that. But there's no reason that we should be forgetting about our gardens in the winter just because we can't be out there working. In fact, don't you think winter should be the time when we can really guiltlessly be enjoying everything our garden has to offer? This is really a time for armchair gardening. And what's not to like about that? So in writing the book, I thought a lot about the choices we make when building our gardens and how they serve us during the winter. And the surprising thing is that each and every design decision that we make seems to be amplified in the winter garden. Because winter is a time really of austerity. The colors are muted. There's a lot less going on. The shapes and forms of things become all the more important. Um, I think that just developing a more unfussy aesthetic will serve you well for the winter garden. And it but like an outline, it's kind of the outline of the garden. And like an outline, it should really include the salient features and be laid out in an orderly manner. Some people call this the backbone of the garden. And as a young person, I had the opportunity to live in Japan for a while. And there I really got to appreciate a more trimmed down, simple, concise aesthetic. And so the winter garden fits naturally into my view of beauty. However, everybody might not feel that way. The Zen gardening thing is not necessarily for everyone. So we do have choices on which plants we use and how we can arrange them with other structures in the garden if you're the type of person who would like to have a more full looking garden all year long. Oh, I'm sorry, I keep going backwards. So I like to think that the best place to start when you're thinking about a winter garden, because a lot of the times in the winter we're experiencing the garden from inside, is to take a look out of some of the windows that you are most likely to be viewing the garden from during the winter, during those much more limited hours of light. So for me, it's, the place where maybe I eat breakfast or lunch, breakfast if I'm getting up late, or maybe the window of my office because I'm in there a lot. And maybe for you could be the exercise room or the kitchen or wherever you're hanging out during daylight hours. So those views out those windows might be a good place to start making some improvements in the garden. So I like to recommend that you take a lot of photographs in now, like you can start this today, tomorrow. Taking a lot of photographs out the windows to sort of document what you're seeing. And then as you make a plan now for how you want to improve those views, you'll have that as a record of what you want to do in the summer, because don't we all know when you go to the garden center in the summer and you see those like flats of pansies, winter garden idea is going to be out the window and you're going to be in full summer mode. So having a plan and having those photographs as documentation are going to help you continue on with the plan and get some things happening in your garden that you're really going to appreciate during the winter season. Another good place to start is at your front entranceway, or the place where you get from, say, the car to the house. There are a lot of possible ways to make a great walkway, but now's a good time really to think about how well that's what you currently have is serving you. Is it easy to shovel? Is it, am I throwing snow onto vulnerable plants? All of those things. This is an entrance way that's kind of very uncharacteristic, and that might be some of the reasons that I like it. It's not straight, and it is varied in its width. So some places it's narrow, other places it's wider. And also the best part of it is there's just plenty to see along the way, with the evergreens and that interesting bark on those river birches. Every time you walk that walk, everything's going to look a little different in the winter light, and it's going to be more fulfilling. So there are other places that we go in the winter that would also warrant an official path, and those might be places like for me, it's the compost pile. I'm there practically every day, the bird feeder, and the wood pile. So I want to make sure that the pathway is clear and is not going to be full of ice, and it's going to be a pleasurable walk. Because if you've got to go out in the freezing cold, why not make it a fun experience or have something to see along the way? The other thing about paths in the winter is the moisture. So it's either wet, muddy, or icy. I think those are our three options. So sometimes, so you really have to take that into consideration when you're building a pathway to a destination. How can you avoid those low spots or bridge the low spots or find ways to get around the obstacles and the difficulties? In this case, the owner put in this little bridge to go across the stream, which might be frozen during a lot of the winter, but at other times it might be a hazard to get across. So this way they can cross the stream and go for their walk in the woods, just like they do in the summer. This is a photograph taken at Bedrock Gardens in Lee, New Hampshire, which is a 35-acre garden built by a couple, one of whom is a sculptor and the other is a mathematician, and they are both extraordinary plants people as well. So there is a ton to see in this garden in the summer, but one of the nice things is there's also a ton to see in this garden in the winter. So Lisa and I got there on a day that like happened to be a blizzard. So it was quite fun spending an hour walking around the garden with the owners. So in this case, they've done this wonderful thing by marking the trail through the woods with this sculpture. And then beyond that, you can see there are some archways that they're training beech trees over. So this way, even though the path is not going to be shoveled, you're not going to be able to necessarily see where the pathway is. They've put these sculptures or these ways of marking the path in place that are always going to be visible. So no matter how deep the snow, you're always going to be able to figure out where the path is. And in addition, you have all these landmarks along the way, things to see and things to admire. So making the walk all the more pleasurable. So I also want to talk about some of the views during the winter. So in this case, we have some rhododendrons basically framing a heart-shaped view, which in the summer would never really be noticeable. Think about those leaves in the foreground full of green vegetation and the trees in the background full of green leaves. You probably would never even notice this opening. So I think one thing that can make the winter garden really special is to take advantage of the fact that the leaves fall and new views open up. So what can you see in the winter that you can't see in the summer, and try to highlight those things? The other alternative to that is in the winter when the views open up, you might be seeing some things that you're not so happy about. And in that case, it's a good idea to prioritize those for screening or changing in some way, so that all winter long you're not focused on the bad things and you can focus on the good things in the garden. Another really important thing in the winter garden is to think about layering of the vegetation and other structures in the garden. This photograph is another one that was taken in New Hampshire. This is at the Fells, which is a very old garden. So it has the advantage of having these magnificent old pines, those large trunks you see in the background. So we have the pine canopy over the whole part of this garden. And then below we have things like the spruce trees in the back and the rhododendrons below. And then we have the ground layer full of ferns and boxwood and other things. So by having that kind of layering adds a lot of dimension to the garden. And then there's layering in the perspective as well. So we have a clear background. That sculpture in the background is really highlighting what's furthest away. And plus it has the evergreen foliage behind it to really show it off. So we have a focal point in the background. We have that stone wall in the middle ground. And then we have the boxwood in the foreground. So by adding layering in both the horizontal and the vertical dimension, a really engaging garden has been created. One that I'm sure if you looked out there every single day, you would see something different. And that was another really nice lesson that I learned from doing the book, is that the older gardens, or the gardens that were built over a really long period of time, tended to be the ones that were the most exciting and had the most going on. And I really think that's because as gardeners, we get involved in the garden and start changing things, and each year we adjust more things, and eventually over a number of years it becomes something really rich and magnificent. So if you start tomorrow with your photographs of the garden and you make some modifications this summer, then you can admire them next winter, take more photographs, and basically repeat the process. And over a couple of years, your garden will be a lot more rich and engaging. This is a photograph taken at Astaku Garden on MDI. And this also is an older garden, so it has a lot going on. And it has, it uses a lot of rhododendrons and broad-leaved evergreens, in addition to the needle-leaved evergreens in the background, but also the deciduous shrubs and trees as well are adding a lot of texture and different color to a scene like this. So thinking about your plant choices, not necessarily for flowers, but for leaf color, leaf texture, stem color, the texture of the branches can all add a lot to the winter garden. So here's another situation where the homeowner has made a very almost like a ground cover, but there's so much going on in this ground cover with the junipers and the heaths and heathers, and then the rhododendrons, in addition to the trees that are surrounding this scene. So this photo happens to have been taken in, I believe it was November or beginning of December. So the heathers actually still have quite a bit of color. That color will get muted as the winter goes on, but it's still, it's still adding a lot to this scene and will be throughout the season. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about caring for the garden and how caring for the garden can and can do a lot for what you're seeing later in the winter. The good news is basically by doing less, you might have a lot more to appreciate during the winter months. So one thing is really to leave as much foliage standing instead of cutting all your perennials back in the fall. How about leaving them up? So I usually tell people just leave them all up next year and see which ones look good and which ones don't look good. And the reason for that is every site has different conditions, like different amount of wind and different uh, soil nutrients and things. So plants grow differently, and while one may stand very nicely in one garden, it may flop over in another garden immediately. So I think everybody has to do this little experiment for themselves and just try to leave as many things standing and see what happens. So in this case, they left the black-eyed Susans in the foreground, which create a kind of a veil sort of in front of the grasses in the middle ground. And then they have the background of the needle-leaved evergreens to really set everything off. So by leaving the foliage, there's a lot more to look at. This would just be a blank white slate right now with the evergreens in the back, had they cut everything back. But it adds some color. And it also adds a lot of movement. So when the wind blows, things will be moving around. They might even be rustling. There'll just be a lot more going on out there. So see if you can give that a try and keep things standing for one season and then decide which things look good, which things don't, and then modify your practices for the next winter. In this garden, the owner, it's a very tidy garden, but the owner has used leaves to mulch the whole garden. They run the mower over the grass and collect up the leaves every fall and then put those leaves right on the garden beds. So they don't have to bag them up. They don't have to put them out to be collected. They just put them right on the garden beds. And by chopping up the leaves, they're going to decompose a lot faster because the microorganisms can get in and start breaking them down. And then those nutrients that are released when the leaves are broken down are then available to the plants in the soil the next year. So they don't need as much, they don't need any fertilization. And then it looks really good to have that nice continuous chopped up leaf mulch on, that you can see. So trying to get away from, buying bags of mulch and all of that. By just finding another use for your leaves, you can avoid all those extra plastic bags and who knows where the mulch comes from and all the problems that could potentially be associated with that. So I encourage you, if you have trees and a place where you can pick up the leaves easily with a mower and chop them up, that works great. This is another kind of mulch. So this is for you're actually kind of cover up plants. I wouldn't advise this just anywhere. You want to only mulch places like this that have herbaceous plants. And then you do have to be mindful to take the mulch off before they really start growing in the spring. And another thing, if you're going to be using the fir boughs as mulch, you want to put the fir boughs on basically after the ground freezes. a lot of people think that the fir boughs are to prevent the ground from freezing, but really, in our climate where we have a lot of freezing, thawing, as we've just been experiencing, the boughs create insulation, but it does keep the ground frozen beneath. And then that prevents the plants from receiving the wrong signal to start growing too soon. So especially for plants that you have just put in the fall, it's always good to put a heavy mulch of some sort on them, whether it's something beautiful like this or just an extra pile of leaves or some straw or whatever you have on hand. Oh, I actually was going to mention something else with waiting for the ground to freeze on the mulch, which this slide brought to mind, was you want to also make sure that the ground is frozen when you put them on, because the mulch on, because a lot of times rodents can find a home under the mulch, and then it kind of turns into like a bed and breakfast under there where they start eating your plants, and it's not a good situation. So the tree in the upper right hand corner is one that has a little wire mesh guard to prevent the trunk from being eaten by voles, particularly, who enjoy eating the very important cambium layer, which is right under the bark. And they often are doing that when there is a snow cover and they are moving around under the snow, and you don't see it happening until the spring. So there are a lot of ways that you can prevent them, but I found, like, basically to prevent all wildlife, some sort of fencing is usually the best. I mean, you can use sprays, and that works too. In the winter, it's a little bit more problematic. So a fence to keep the deer away is a good idea. And a lot of fencing options are out there, whether they're very see-through and sturdy, or like the lower left, this was a very flimsy fence made of slivers, basically, of bamboo that were wired together. And amazingly, it worked quite well to deter the deer. And then the lower right, this was a walled garden, which I found to be just so lovely. So in addition to focusing your attention on this special garden place the owner had developed, the wall surrounding this part of the garden actually kept the deer out and kept all of these yummy broadleaf evergreens away from the deer. So as a way to kind of cohabitate with the wildlife, we need to just protect the things that we are most concerned about. And so making your garden a home for wildlife is a great thing to do, especially in the winter. I just find that when I see birds at the bird feeder, or even squirrels, it really brightens my day. And so this is kind of like a bird feeder palooza situation here. They have a bird food for every kind of bird, and it's all right there. And it really is a bird feeding central location. And then another nice thing is they have these shrubs around the feeders, which provide great, like, landing places for the birds, or staging area. They can wait for a feeding station to open up, and but be close enough that they can get there first. So that's a nice thing to do and to have for the winter. Just be sure to clean your feeders regularly, and mind better once the weather gets a little bit nicer. So the other alternative to feeding the birds using a bird feeder is just to plant more plants that create food for the birds. So in this case, we have some waxwings feeding on crab apples. So you can see that the leaves are just coming out on the tree and the crab apples are still there. So if you think about it, this is kind of a tough time for birds to be finding natural food. But in the case of the crab apple, this tree was still full of apples for them to feed on. So some other woody plants that have fruit that stays on long into the winter are bayberry, the two chokeberries, the red and black chokeberry, and the high bush cranberry all keep their fruits on for quite a long time into the winter. And usually it is the waxwings. Sometimes if we're having a crossbill eruption happen, you might get a bunch of crossbills come and eat the fruit, but it is usually waxwing food. And so there are the other animals that you're sharing your garden with that maybe you should think about when you're deciding what kind of plants you want to put in. So we have the squirrels who are just like endlessly entertaining. So foods like oaks and beech trees produce a lot of nuts. And don't forget about our pines and spruces that also have a ton of seed for mammals. Even if you go out there now, well, we have still a little bit of snow on the ground, you'll see a lot of seeds on the surface of the snow, and a lot of those are from the birch trees, all the various different birches, as well as the spruce and pine seeds right there on the surface of the snow for these guys to find food. So another population you might think you want to feed or house in the winter are the insects. So this was a bug hotel that was created by a homeowner, and she packed this box with a lot of foliage that has, or stems that are hollow. So she cut some of those down and bundled them up and put them in here, and also added a lot of blocks of wood and drilled very deep holes in those. And so the stems will provide homes for bees, particularly, who lay their eggs in there to overwinter, as well as these holes in the logs. So if you're thinking about leaving your foliage standing, it's also helping out that are using it for their the phases in the winter. So it's either eggs or larvae, or some insects actually overwinter as adults. So those hollow stems provide great places for them. So in this case, the owner was a little distraught because the mason bees laid some eggs in that birch log that you can see on the left there. And she was immediately concerned when some chickadees came and found a food in the form of bee eggs. But the good thing is that those holes are very deep. So the chickadee might have gotten the first egg, but the chickadee certainly didn't get all of the eggs. So having a place like this, especially if you don't have a lot of standing foliage, is great. And it's a place for all of our beneficial insects to overwinter. And then there's the brush pile. So again, in thinking about how to make our make our gardens more interesting, but also how to kind of do less and get more at the same time, we can create a brush pile that provides a lot of habitat for small mammals. It'll provide, and a lot of insects that are laying eggs under bark. And it will also provide a home for amphibians in the summer. So I love that this is a very humorous version of a brush pile here. And then getting out in the winter. So there's some ways you can, create some things in the snow when we have it. And maybe you're thinking about, oh, I'd like to have a labyrinth, a permanent one. Well, trying it out in the winter is a great way to see how well you'd like it, or to figure out a location for it. And then you have the benefit of it being a very ephemeral thing that just goes away when the weather warms. You can either decide to have it just in the winter, or you can make something slightly more permanent. This is a spiral of it cut in a grassy area that they only mow part of it, and the other parts, while they have been cut back by the time this photo was taken, they leave the foliage standing in the spiral between the areas that are mown. So that can help, again, provide habitat. And also it provides this interesting texture that you can admire through the winter. When the snow falls on it, the textures will be highlighted and the two areas will look very different.
Kathy, we're still a couple slides behind. For some reason, it didn't progress when you hit the button.
Oops. Okay. Where are we? Are we seeing the snowman now?
Not yet, still on the insects.
Oh, geez. Huh. Okay. Did we get to the labyrinth?
Not quite. I'm still seeing the same one.
All right. Well, we can just go on, I guess. I was
Okay.
just gonna just say one other little thing about getting out in the winter, how like with the whole COVID thing, I had, well, actually before the whole COVID thing started, and I'd already started working on the book, I decided to build a fire pit. And then the COVID thing happened that spring 2020. And I can't tell you how many hours I've spent at that fire pit with friends over the last, I got almost 2 years now. And just what a blessing that was to have decided to build that, and then to have COVID happen like that was just, it was just luck, I guess. So I guess the last message is just to encourage you to get out as much as possible in the winter and enjoy everything you can about the garden, and don't worry about the fact that there are no flowers or leaves. just get out there. So I will just stop that. I don't know where we're at. Okay.
Excellent. Sorry about those technical difficulties, but yeah, I'm glad it worked for most of the program. So
Yeah, what happened?
Does anyone in the audience have any questions? I have a quick one to start out. I find your discussion of like how we create gardens that are both hospitable to natural, like local wildlife, and ones that are beautiful and more cultivated. How do you come to that balance in your own work and in your own personal gardens? How do you sort of come to that balance between cultivating a really beautiful space that's sort of pleasing for the human eye versus for an animal's
for wildlife of all sorts? Well, I think they kind of just go together, to tell you the truth, because the worst possible garden for wildlife is just like a lawn. So so for me, I really love plants of all sorts and varieties. So as soon as you put a plant in, that's like habitat right there. So birds are going to land on it. It's going to be producing seed. It's going to be producing fruit. So And not only that, but the fruit is going to be, and the seeds are probably beautiful too to us. So that's how I just feel like the more diversity we put into our gardens, and the more structural diversity, like as far as layering goes, all of that's more habitat, more food, and that's going to benefit wildlife uh, for sure. And that's not even getting into what's going on below the soil, because that's a whole nother area of wildlife that I didn't even talk about. So, which we can't really appreciate, but the plants do appreciate that.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone in the audience have any questions or comments?
Maybe not.
This is Laura, and I just want to thank you so much, Cathy. This was fabulous. And I am in a new house, or new to me, and new property. So I don't really know what is, this is my first winter in this house. I'm living in another one down the road, but I'm excited to take some pictures. We have a winter water view that we don't in the summer, a glimpse in the summer, but just got me thinking about how to frame that winter view in as much as I can. But one of my problems is that we have to add on to the house. It's too small, needs some other stuff. And so I don't really know what the land is going to look like, what I'll have. And, I'd love to build the house around the gardens if I had them in mind, but, we've got septic fields and things like that to think about. So anyway, I just feel like you've given me a lot to think about in terms of being able to just go ahead and get the rest of the house built, and then see what I have to work with. But there's
So if you have to move anything, to build more, you should think about that too. And maybe you can save some things to be planted elsewhere, because to be honest, it's kind of hard to find, nice looking plants at the nursery, and sometimes moving things is a better option. So, just think about what you can do with what you have there, and maybe even just how you can rearrange it. And if people are here digging left foundation, well, they can easily move a plant.
Yes, yeah. Actually, I don't think there's a lot to move. There's a great big lawn that I can't wait to have be gone. But then there's, there's a rock wall and some fields behind it and some big trees there. I'm trying to figure out where to put an oak tree though. So anyway, I can't wait. I don't have your book yet, but I can't wait to get it.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Laura. And thank you so much for Cathy for doing this. This is really a fascinating talk.
You're welcome. It was fun.
All right. I think that'll do it. Have a good night, everyone.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Em.
Thanks again.
Thank you very much.